people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of The Diet Doc, and we are here for another episode of the Life Mastery Podcast. And this is not Corey, my usual co-host, but it is her cousin, our training director, Luke Propst, all the way from our satellite office in San Diego, California. Good morning, Luke.
Good morning. Thanks for giving me a little chance to chat with you.
All right. Well, Luke and I were just together for the annual conference of the Diet Doc. We flew him and Corey all the way out to Nashville and had a great time. Luke always brings together some tremendous information about training. Specifically this year, we wanted to focus on the entrepreneurial aspects of the future of fitness or personal training within fitness entrepreneurship and nutrition consulting, how all of that merges together. But while I've got Luke here for this science or fiction segment, I want to talk about some of the components that go into creating the best training systems, because I've been around long enough to see some undulating theories, and everybody changes the game a little bit here and there when it comes to frequency, intensity, training duration, all of those variables. So who better to chat about that than Luke Propst, because Luke has a master's degree in exercise science. He has worked with pro and semi-pro athletes, collegiate athletes while he was in school. So tell us just a little bit about your background, because I know, Luke, you were an athlete as well, played some college soccer, semi-pro football. Kind of go through all of that for us.
Yeah, so to go back a little bit, I was severely undersized in high school. As a sophomore, finishing up the year, the head coach of the varsity team saw me walking through the hallway, and he said, "So, are you going to play varsity next year?" And I said, "I'd like to." And he said, "You better hit the weight room," and walked away. That was it. So ever since then, I've just been hooked on using weights to drive performance. So that was, all through high school, into my undergrad, started working with NAIA women's basketball team there, and that kind of got me hooked into working with athletes and focusing on their performance. Did my master's degree and worked with Division I athletes in a kind of a broad range of sports, and did my own, I pushed my own athletic abilities as far as they could take me, and some injuries taught me some important lessons about when to push and when to back off a little bit. Kind of, a lot of times you learn the hard way, I guess, but that just led me to kind of digest as much information as I possibly could from a performance standpoint, incorporating as much bodybuilding style training and how that can help benefit the power or strength athlete, and then using what you learn from that power and strength side, how that can help the bodybuilding side, and just how muscle physiology works, how we can organize our training structure as best as possible. And so that's led me to, more silly little initials after my name with certifications and courses and things like that, just to start answering that question: what is optimal, what is best, how do we arrange that, and how can we push that a little bit better?
Yeah, and if I'm doing the math, if you started in high school, you've been training for probably almost 25 years or very close. Yep. So like me, you probably have tried just about everything you possibly can. When you were in high school, because I also started training pretty aggressively when I was about 12 years old. And, what I did then obviously is not what I'm doing now. But in between those 2 points, I have tried a few different things. And besides the anecdotal evidence of myself, I've had the luxury of hundreds, if not thousands, of clients that I've helped, not just their nutrition progress, but also training. So tell me how you started as a teenager and what your results were, and some of the pros and cons of what you did.
So I think most of us, when we started and didn't really, unless you had the luck and privilege of someone who knew what they were doing, kind of taking you under your wing. I mean, you hear stories about that, like 16 and somebody who knows what they're doing teaches you along the way. Without that, we kind of just do the best we can and go to magazines or any kind of popular knowledge we can find. So I did what my football coach told us to do in practice. And then to supplement that and kind of add to it, I did what bodybuilding magazines said in those, which one, combining those two just in a like haphazard 15, 16-year-old way doesn't work all that great. But you do start to put some pieces together, I think. And it's an evolution, like just like anything else. We start wherever we start and we just try and keep getting better. So if that's gaining experiential knowledge, then that's where it goes, and we just try to build on top of that. The funny thing is, though, a lot of times you learn lessons like way back then that you don't really get what they meant until later, when you have a little bit more of a scientific understanding of how this stuff works and why this did and maybe why that didn't.
Exactly. And I could say the same thing about my progress. I probably overtrained a little bit too. I was training with the baseball team, and then some days I would go home, having trained in the morning before school, I would hit the YMCA on my way home. And if I couldn't do that at 10 o'clock at night, I may be in my garage lifting weights at, that night. So I was always hitting, a couple workouts a day, not just hitting each body part twice a week. It was probably twice a week and sometimes twice, in the same day. But as you said, anecdotally, you end up letting your progress or lack thereof guide you a little bit. So I was forced, because I wanted all of that volume, all of that frequency. I wanted it to work for me. I was having to decide, what body parts I was going to work on what days, maybe different angles. If I was doing, sometimes in Flex magazine or something, there were people who would do the same body part twice a day. I remember somebody like Kevin Lebroni did that. And of course, at 12, 15 years old, I had no idea what kind of performance enhancing drugs they were using that was even possible, but it still made me look at how I could get more optimization. So now that you do have a great scientific understanding, your own prolific powerlifting career, tons of your own client and athlete database in your brain, tell me how you divide up all of those variables. What are you looking at when you're creating a program? So
I think a big part of it is there's a difference between creating the optimal program for someone, and optimal is kind of this giant word out there that can be a little tough to decipher, but also creating the best practical program for that person. If I decided that the most optimal program was 6 days a week with twice a day workouts, it doesn't really matter if that's the best, because 9 times out of 10 people that have, unless you're a professional athlete and that's your only thing to do is work out, like that's your job, work out and eat, you can't do it anyway. So it doesn't really matter if it's optimal if it's not practical for that person's situation. So the first question when I take on a new client in my head is not like, how do we design the best program? It's just gathering information. How much time do they have to devote to this? If I make them a program that's 4 days a week and they can only work out 3 days a week, we wasted both of our time. So we have to decide how much time this person can devote. And then from their kind of past history, if they've only done 3 day a week full body workouts, I can't do 5 times a week, multiple sessions right off the bat. That may be something we want to work towards, but you have to take into account where they are, what their situation is, and then design around that, which I mean, it's nice to have this kind of theoretical framework for what is best, but it has to be more like what is best right now.
So let's take a very specific target demographic, because I'm going to bet most of the people listening to or watching this are going to say, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. I mean, I want the maximum optimal results. So if you tell me I have to train twice a day, 7 days a week, I will do that. So take that as a lead, and maybe just, a pretty young, healthy person in their 20s or 30s who are really trying to create a base for strength, performance. They might just be a life athlete trying to look and feel their best, or a competitive athlete. but give me the frequency, duration, intensity, kind of those breakdowns that you would create.
Well, there's a couple kind of basic rules, not rules necessarily, but things that you want to cover. You have to balance frequency, intensity, and volume. So I like to look, and we've had some talks about this recently, and I'm doing some experimenting with you on myself to kind of see what is best, so to speak, if we're trying to find that answer. But in general, I think right now, and this is always an evolving kind of concept, right now is always changing, so I should be getting smarter each day. But we want to have stimulation of muscle groups twice a week. And that can be set up in a couple different ways. We can have a very heavy, intense session, another lighter session, and not lighter in the sense of intensity or effort necessarily, but in the sense of overall intensity, like a percentage of 100% of your 1 rep max. That is lighter, even though that session might feel harder, more draining, make you more tired. But we've been talking quite a bit about what can we recover from optimally, and that changes the question a little bit. What we can do in the gym and what we can recover from aren't necessarily the same thing. We can create a sense of overreaching, and if we stay in that state of overreaching for too long, we can get into a true state of overtraining, which is very dangerous and difficult to come out of. But if I had to just start off with a basic underpinning, I'm saying 4 days a week, upper lower split. We're going to have a heavy day as far as level of intensity relative to 100%, and then also a lighter day in that definition of intensity, but much more higher rep, less rest, more of what you would consider the more bodybuilding style of training. Lots of blood flow, lots of metabolic stress, metabolic fatigue, that kind of thing. I think that is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just, I was going to say, I know we're going to run out of time in terms of talking about all the variables. So let's definitely key in on frequency. And I know you have to kind of touch on all of the other variables to put it into context. But when you say, twice a week per muscle group, so a heavy, in kind of a different type of split with upper and lower twice. Let's say for the lower, one is obviously going to include squats. What would that squat day look like? And then how would your second lower body day look? How would they differ?
So if you're for myself, a powerlifting athlete, it's very important that you use the specific lift that you need to train. If you're not, that is not so important. So I have to low bar squat in my competitive stance. But someone who is looking for the most muscle and strength, it doesn't have to be that stance. They can use some heavy goblet squats. They can use different variations that will accommodate your body the best. But in general, we're going to have a squat pattern of some kind, absolutely. I don't think we can argue that doesn't work. But from a heavy standpoint, we can talk about getting into 5s and 3s, things that are very heavy relative to how strong you are, because we want to push that level. When we have our more intensity from a metabolic stress standpoint, it would be typically a different variation of that lift. So if I'm low bar squatting on my heavy day, I might want to do leg press, or there's my goblet, or maybe a unilateral movement, some pistols or Bulgarian split squat, something like that that's hitting the same muscle groups, but in a slightly different fashion, and then focus more on that metabolic stress there. We're stimulating growth a couple different ways throughout that week so that we can get the most stimulus on the tissue.
You bring up a good point between a pure strength athlete and somebody who might have some other muscle building goals, certainly athletic goals if somebody is in a performance sport. But let's kind of talk about two of those specific groups, strength and let's say just bodybuilding physique sport. So with strength, you're going to be doing your event lift, the low bar squat. You're hitting those lower rep numbers. What else do you do in that workout? Then how many days do you wait until you train again? And talk a little bit about what kind of intensity differences or just what the framework of the training would be so that you're not overreaching too far or overtraining.
So there's a lot of emerging science in this as far as auto-regulation, and that's kind of a really big term. You got RPE by Mike Tuchscherer, and then kind of like some more simplified usage of it, so it's not so hard to think about with reps in reserve, which kind of makes a little bit more sense in your head. And then I'm currently playing around with using velocity of the bar speed as a way to monitor, I guess, performance on that day, and then also that would help influence my recovery from week to week. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but essentially progressive overload is what we want. And if we're unable to do that, then we need to adjust something, whether that's frequency is too high, volume is too high, maybe intensity is too high relative to the other ones. So if we're not keeping good notes, keeping good track of what we're doing, we don't know if things are working or not. Because what you can handle relative, if we're on the same frequency, kind of eliminate some variables. If we're on the same frequency and we have relatively the same intensity, if volumes are the same, you might be able to recover from more than I can recover from. The other side of that, let's add in somebody who's, considerably stronger than us. If we're doing the same frequency, intensity, and volume, but I'm using 400 pounds and some other monster out there is using 700 pounds, that can affect it as well. It's just more stressful to put that much load on a skeleton. So what it looks like on paper from me to him is not the most important thing, but what the results are, how we're able to progress. So it can change based on individual to individual, which is what makes it so difficult to have this answer of, well, this is best.
Mm-hmm.
Because
absolutely. So it's kind of a final piece, and again, we're never going to unravel this completely, but just talking about frequency, and then we'll have you back and we'll continue the conversation. If let's say we move from that heavy base type training, tell me for a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, those two groups specifically, how you would arrange a second workout for that week.
So that second workout is going for a bodybuilder and for a powerlifter. The only difference is in how we look at weak points. So if I'm looking at a powerlifter and we have our heavy squat day, and then I need to look at that second session, depending on where my weaknesses in the squat are, is going to help me with my exercise selection. So if my weak points are in my quads on my squat day, well, then I'm probably going to do some kind of close stance, narrow foot position leg press for very high reps, high volume, to put some more stress on those quads and bring them up on my secondary day. If I'm looking at a bodybuilder, I'm not looking at the squat performance to dictate my weak points and help with exercise selection. We're going to now look at the muscles themselves, how they appear on stage. If my quads are dominating the rest of my legs, well, I'm probably not going to make that same decision of close stance, narrow foot position leg press to blow up the quads even more. You might need to focus more in on the hamstrings or the glutes, or maybe specific areas of the quad if there's, a little bit of imbalance there. So the main difference is going to be in exercise selection, much more than set rep progression.
Mm-hmm. So next time we have you back on, we might talk about some of that, the actual sets and reps and, digging into the volume as well as perceived intensity, stuff like that. I was just in Australia with Eric Helms, and I know, he's really big talking about that kind of stuff right now. I've done a lot of research personally in that. But one of the things I want to do as just a way of saying goodbye for this week is something that I don't do enough, Luke, which is to thank you for the fantastic work you do with our clients. I know I end up sending you clients from around the world that I'm working with on their nutrition. Some of our program owners send you their clients. You work with some of our actual program owners. So you're just doing a lot of great training, design work, and coaching for us. And that's just as good as it gets. You are fantastic. I never hear anything but phenomenal reports about your work. So couldn't be happier with that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, and guys, that's going to be it for this week's Science or Fiction with the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. We'll be back later this week. We're still going to cover a coaching clinic where we have one of our Diet Doc program owners talk about their work clinically with clients. We're going to do a fitness entrepreneurship segment. All of this will touch on some of the information that we discussed at the Diet Doc annual conference in Nashville just last week. So stay with us this week, guys, and we're going to get out some great content. Thanks, and have a great day.